Okay, everyone. My name is Ashley Nicole Engel, and I am the Green New Deal organizer with the Indigenous Environmental Network. We are really proud to be one of 15 member organizations of the Green New Deal Network, which is really, many different organizations coming together and representing hundreds of grassroots and communities all across Turtle Island who are really dedicated to ensure push forward something that really uplifts climate, care, jobs, and justice. That's why we're so excited today to introduce the Thrive Act. We have a once-in-a-generation chance for Congress to pass a transformational economic recovery package that puts over 15 million people to work in family-sustaining union jobs all across the economy, from clean energy to care work to manufacturing, and to cut climate pollution in half by 2030, and also to advance gender, environmental, indigenous, economic, and racial justice, with particular attention paid to Black and Indigenous communities. It's called the Thrive Act. This bill offers a blueprint for economic renewal backed by a movement of movements, including unions, racial justice, climate, Indigenous organizers, and other grassroots groups. The Thrive Act will be introduced here today, and our lead sponsors are Senators Ed Markey and Jeff Merkley, Representatives Debbie Dingell, Elon Omar, Jamal Bowman, Pramila Jayapal, Earl Blumenauer, Ro Khanna, Yvette Clark, and Annette Bergen. So, I'm really excited that you're here today, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Representative Debbie Dingell, one of our champions.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here for what we think is a very important day to focus on how we can build back our economy so that it works for everyone. We're in a pivotal moment right now. It's been a month since we passed the American Rescue Plan. Family and communities are already seeing the benefits, but we can't stop. Nearly 17 million Americans are receiving unemployment benefits, and nearly 3 million women have been forced to leave the workforce. We're pivoting from relief to recovery. We're working together to advance good paying union jobs, racial equity, and climate action. I want to just say this, that for me, it is false choices. And last year we kept pitting jobs versus the environment. It isn't either or, it's both. How we build back our workforce and our economy can't be as it was before. We can't expect everything to fall back into place and work for everyone. The pandemic has shined a light on the cracks in our society. It's placed the burden on vulnerable communities. That's why we need a bold economic renewable plan, and the Thrive Act is exactly what we need. This legislation would authorize at least $1 trillion per year over the next decade, providing family-sustaining union jobs for over 15 million American workers. Think about it. 15 million families will be able to put food on the table, pay their bills, go to the doctor when they need to, send their kids to school, and recover from this horrific, devastating year that we've just had. To make this happen, the unions and the environmentalists have come together and are working together to ensure that we rebuild our country's economy with a focus on justice and healing. This nation's facing unprecedented challenges that we have to respond to, but do it in a very intentional, intersectional way, and followed with policies that help everybody. That's the only way we're going to get this done, where we're going to protect jobs and address the climate change issues in this country, and those that have come from the COVID pandemic, empower working families, and address the issues that this country desperately needs to address. The Thrive agenda will guide us as we mobilize on a transformative mission to bring justice and healing to our communities. And with the kind of broad coalition that we have of colleagues, advocates, activists, we'll save our environment will protect jobs, create jobs, and achieve the racial and economic equity that our nation demands. We've never been challenged like we are right now. Our communities have experienced trauma, tragedy, and uncertainty. And we're nowhere near out of the woods. But we're not going to get out of the woods if we don't do it together. It takes a village. It's going to take rolling up our sleeves, a lot of hard work and collaboration in the days and the months ahead. And you know what? Years. This isn't going to be done overnight. To combat and rebuild from the economic devastation we're witnessing today. But that's exactly why we need to be bold and why we need to be transformative and why this legislation does that to rebuild our economy. Through the Thrive Act, we can reorient the priorities of our government in our nation so that we are elevating workers, particularly those who've been denied opportunities throughout our history, around the shared goals of combating climate change, modernizing a totally broken infrastructure, and bring a new economic era to our neighborhoods and communities. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank my colleagues, especially Senator Markey and our other great Crow leads for being partners on this Thrive agenda. It's an idea that's grounded in neighborhoods that have been hurting in the last year and many for decades before. It's time for action. It's time to think big. It's time to thrive. And now I'm going to pass this off to my dear friend and colleague and co-lead on this bill, Representative Yvette Clarke.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and greetings, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent New York's 9th Congressional District, that's Central and South Brooklyn. And I am deeply honored to be joining all of you today as we announce the official introduction of the Thrive Act. Thank you to the Green New Deal Network, and to all the individuals and organizations who have been involved in the important work of the Thrive agenda. I believe that our nation is in the midst of a reckoning across our civil society, which has been brought about not only by the interrelated crises around COVID-19 and its impact on our economy, but also as a direct result of the enduring crises that we have faced for countless years with racial injustice and climate change. Our nation has now been forced to come to terms with the large disparities that exist within public health, environmental pollution, and law enforcement, just to name a few, and which consistently inflict the greatest impact on communities of color, tribal communities, and immigrant communities, as well as all other vulnerable communities throughout our society. These many disparities have also underscored the deeply rooted systemic racism and inequality that continue to plague our institutions, our civil society, and indeed much of our nation's antiquated infrastructure. My constituents in Brooklyn and people all across this nation are now demanding for us to be bold, to rise up and meet the magnitude of this moment. And I believe that Congress must heed their call. I'm convinced that we have the once-in-a-century opportunity in this Congress to truly set our nation on a path to healing and recovery. Our recovery must center on building back our society in ways that address the deep, broad, and long-lasting impacts of systemic racism, injustice, and economic inequality. And we must structure our national recovery so that it empowers workers and finally lays the groundwork for a 21st century America that is driven by clean energy to stabilize our climate and maintain a healthy environment for all of our communities to indeed thrive. That's why I'm proud to officially introduce the Thrive Act, along with my esteemed colleagues in the House and Senate, that will lay down the foundation for how we begin to genuinely and fully build back better. By investing $1 trillion each year over the next decade, the Thrive Act will allow us to transform our economy into one that is sustainable, equitable, pro-worker, and racially just. Let me repeat that amount, $10 trillion over the next decade. That's what we need at this moment to match the scale of the crises we are facing. With this investment in our future, we can virtually end unemployment and create over 15 million good-paying jobs, all while cutting climate pollution in half by 2030. And I'm excited by the opportunity we have before us with the Thrive Act, and I am equally, if not more excited, by the amazing grassroots support behind it. So to wrap up, allow me to once again thank the Green New Deal Network for organizing this morning's event and for all of the great work that they have been doing in mobilizing and organizing around the Thrive agenda. As the only Black woman in New York State's congressional delegation and a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I look forward to continuing to lead in this essential work within all of the weeks and months to come. And now is my honor to turn things over for a brief video from my colleague, Representative Earl Blumenauer, who wishes he could have joined us in person today. Thank you.
You know, for too long, people have argued that you really can't have a low carbon future and be able to deal with the protection of the economy and deal with the injustices that we are addressing. That's not the case. That's a false dichotomy. Indeed, we cannot address an economic future without dealing with carbon pollution, climate change, and the cries for racial justice. This is an exciting moment with an energized Congress, with an administration that is on our side, and the public who understands that all of these pieces are interconnected. I'm excited to see the Thrive Act moving forward for introduction and look forward to working together to enact it into law, to give us the low carbon future and the justice that we demand. You know, for too long, people have argued that you really can't have a low carbon future and be able to deal with the protection of the economy and deal with the injustices that we are addressing. That's not the case. Injustices that we are addressing. That's not the case. Injustices.
And now we'll hear from Congressman Jason Crow.
Hi, good morning. So good to be with all of you. Thank you to Senator Markey for your continued leadership on all of this, and to my good friend Debbie Dingell from Michigan for leading on this effort and so many efforts as well. I'm Jason Crow. I'm proud to represent Colorado's 6th Congressional District and to be joining with all of my colleagues here to introduce as an original co-sponsor this extremely important bill and transformative effort. One person who's not here is our good friend Deb Haaland, who was such an incredible leader on this effort last Congress, but is exactly where she needs to be as Secretary of the Interior, leading to protect our public lands and also to bring attention to the indigenous rights and the issues that have been forgotten for so long by our country. So we miss Deb, but she is doing the work that she needs to be doing and serving our country so well. Listen, the climate crisis is here. It's here. This is not some future issue. And we know that here in Colorado. As in the past year, we've had our state's largest wildfires that have swept across our state, causing unbelievable havoc. We see that with our water issues and the degradation of our watersheds. We see that with increased asthma rates and public health, and with the pandemic that we're dealing with right now. I sit on the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committees, and we know that the climate crisis will bring increased pandemics. The most expensive thing our nation has ever done is not be ready for this pandemic. So we have to do the right thing and make investments now to be prepared to save lives, to address our public health, and to save our planet And by making the smart investments now, we save a lot more money down the road because we are already paying for the consequences of our inaction. I'm so proud to represent one of our nation's most diverse districts. I have over 160 languages spoken in my district. We are home to so many immigrants and refugees. Nearly 20% of my constituents were born outside of the country. And what we know is that the impacts of the climate crisis have not been felt equally by all communities. Black and brown communities, such as those that I'm proud to represent, have been disproportionately impacted. And that's why I'm extremely excited about the fact that half of the investments from the Thrive Act will go towards those communities that have felt the impact the most and that need the most help. The other thing I'm really excited about is the attention that this pays to the labor movement. You know, those blue collar workers, those men and women who get up early in the morning, work until well after sunrise, in some of our hardest jobs, you know, the frontline workers, the essential workers that have had so much attention paid to them during the pandemic, who really are the ones that keep this country going. By bringing our labor brothers and sisters into the fold and working with them during this transition, we will create a more equitable and fair society for everybody, particularly those working Americans that really make our country move. In Colorado alone, it's estimated that the investments from the Thrive Act will create over 160,000 jobs in the first year alone. So let's be clear here. Not only do we have to do this to address the climate crisis, to save lives, to save our planet, but by doing this, we will create jobs and create a better, stronger, more resilient economy. That's why I'm here. That's why my colleagues are here. And that's why it's so important that we get this done. So with that, I'm extremely proud and pleased to hand this over to my good friend, Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Randy, over to you.
Thank you, Representative Crow. And it's such an honor for me to be with all of the activists and all of the members of Congress who are, you know, looking at the future and with the Thrive Act and other things are trying to actually solve problems as opposed to what was characteristic of not only the last administration, but so many others where they exacerbate polarization and the division. We have had transitions. Look, I'm a social studies teacher. I teach history a lot. There's been economic transitions. There's been justice transitions all throughout the time that America has been America. And most of the time when we have economic transitions from, for example, from agriculture to the industrial age, from the industrial age to the tech age, they have not been just, and that people have gotten hurt. There's a transition now. We have to transition to make sure that we have a sustainable planet for years to come. And what the Thrive Act does is it says, for the first time ever, let's make it just. Let's make sure that people don't get hurt, particularly the people who historically get hurt. The Black and brown folks, people who are indigenous, people who are poor, people who have been in rural areas who actually have been abandoned by coal already. The fossil fuel industry doesn't care. They just want to be who they want to be. But we need to actually create this just transition. And that's where the activists and the labor movement and the members of the House and the Senate have been so prescient about the Thrive Act, because it's how you create this just transition, how you make sure that there are good paying jobs for the future, how you make sure there's the kind of training that we need, and how we make sure we do this in a way with intention towards those who have been left behind or those who have been abandoned. That's why the AFT is completely in support. Yes, I know we can only be 100% in support, but we're 200% in support of this. Because it's not just that all of these issues show up in our classrooms, but this is who we need to be as America. We need a permanent investment that goes beyond COVID recovery. I'm glad the president yesterday talked about lead pipes and the fact that you can't drink water out of water fountains. Yes, this is creation of jobs. This is creation of ways where we can drink the water in schools, in Flint, and it also creates jobs. Same with air. How many times have we talked about asthma? It's not just about COVID. It took COVID for people to focus on ventilation systems in schools, 40% of which are crumbling already. That's what the Thrive Act is about, turning this around, creating 15 million family-sustaining jobs, investing in our climate, in our care infrastructure. This is a win-win situation. Let's do this. This is where the government should be spending its money, where we should be doing big things. When did we stop? When did we forget that we could do big things? Eisenhower did big things in the highway construction. We did big things when we created the railroad system. Let's do big things again, but do it in a way that lifts up thriving for everyone, particularly the communities that have been left behind. And with that, I want to just turn it over to Representative Nanette Diaz-Barragan, who has a message for us.
I'm Congresswoman Barragan, and I'm proud to join my colleagues as an original co-sponsor of the Thrive Act. The crises we're facing are all connected, so the solutions should be too. The Thrive Act tackles the issue of environmental justice head-on. Constituents in my district in the harbor area of Los Angeles County experience environmental injustice every day. Our community is surrounded by 3 freeways, 2 commercial ports, and urban oil drilling. Some of these oil wells are literally next door to schools, playgrounds, and backyards. As a result, we have some of the worst air pollution and some of the highest rates of asthma, lung disease, and cancer in the country. And during COVID-19, the prevalence of these diseases has been linked to more deaths. The Thrive Act will help rebuild our nation based on the principles of environmental justice. It puts frontline communities at the decision-making table, getting leadership from impacted communities, unions, and indigenous nations to guide $1 trillion in new annual investments to build back better and fossil fuel-free. These investments will help upgrade our infrastructure for clean water, affordable public transit, a reliable clean energy grid, and much more. The bill commits at least 50% of these investments for frontline communities that are hit first and worst by the climate, economic, and public health crisis that we face. The Thrive Act would enforce strong environmental, labor, and equity standards so that we can build an economy that works for our community, not at the expense of our community. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform society by centering the recovery around equity, climate, justice, and jobs. Future generations are watching. We have to meet the moment. The moment.
My name is Sofia Bastida. I am a DACA recipient and immigrant woman of color. I am also the lead organizer with Mujeres Unidas y Activas. Today I am here representing the women of Mujeres Unidas y Activas and the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. Domestic workers have been impacted by both the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. In our state, California, during the past year, we have not only faced the devastation of COVID, but also endured the terrible wildfires. Many domestic workers were expected to work while being surrounded by fires and breathing smoke. Care workers have been understood as essential and have faced this crisis on the front lines. Within the membership of MUA, many of our members lost their jobs during the pandemic. We have struggled in mutual aid to support one another through real day-to-day needs around food, transportation, housing, and personal necessities. I am so excited to be here supporting the Thrive Act on the day that is being introduced to Congress. The Thrive Act makes care were core to economic recovery, whether it's healthcare, childcare, domestic workers, teachers, or elder care. COVID has not only emphasized how critical it is to invest in social infrastructure that makes our society whole. The Thrive Act creates over 23 million jobs in the care and public sector, investing in essential workers, many of whom are underpaid, and overwhelmingly a workforce of women of color who have held up the economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thrive will help domestic workers and care workers get back on their feet to continue providing for their families and the most vulnerable in our communities. Investing in care work is critical to climate resiliency and to rebuilding our economy in the way that puts all of our well-being at the center. I want to thank senators and representatives who are supporting us, including those who are speaking with us here today as our champions. As a movement of care workers in California, we want to see our senators in California supporting Thrive and using Thrive as a basis of any recovery and jobs package that this Congress moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sophia. You're right. We do have a once in a generation opportunity to really, push Congress to go big and bold so that they can really meet the scale necessary to address all of the intersecting crises that we are currently facing today. And so, I want to say thank you so much to everybody for attending this. And I'm going to go ahead and open up now for questions. And so we can go ahead and get that started. We do have a question from Lisa Petrell, and we'll go ahead and kick this over to Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, if you're available. And this is this a bicameral resolution or is this a new bill?
This is a bicameral piece of legislation that is being sponsored by Congressman Ed Markey in the Senate, as well as the numerous members of Congress that you've seen here, led by Congresswoman Debbie Dingell in the House.
Thank you so much for that, Representative Clarke. And just reminding folks that you can put your questions in the Q&A feature that is in Zoom, and we can go ahead and kick those over. All right, so since there's no more additional questions, we're going to go ahead and kick this over to our grassroots section, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Ben Beachy of the Sierra Club.
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks so much for leading the charge here. My name is Ben Beachy, and I'm the Living Economy Director at Sierra Club. So here's the thesis of the Thrive Act, the thesis that everyone before me has powerfully spoken to. We need an economic renewal plan as big as the crises we face, with justice at its core. We need a plan that is as large as the physical reality of the climate crisis, the economic reality of mass unemployment, and the structural reality of systemic racism. Now is not the time for small-minded measures. We asked economists at the University of Massachusetts how big this economic recovery package needs to be to meet our jobs, justice, and climate goals. And that produced a clear answer. $1 trillion per year for a decade. $1 trillion per year would create and sustain over 15 million good jobs, enough to end the unemployment crisis. $1 trillion per year for a decade would help us meet our climate goals, 100% clean energy by 2035, 100% zero emission buildings, 100% clean electric vehicles. And $1 trillion per year also would counteract systemic racism and economic, gender, and environmental injustice. That's not just a talking point, it's a policy priority. The Thrive Act would direct at least half of these investments to frontline communities who have endured decades of divestment due to redlining, exclusion, and structural injustice. And critically, the bill puts those who are on the front lines of fighting injustice at the front of the line for building a more just economy. The Thrive Act creates a board of representatives from impacted communities, unions, and indigenous nations to steer this $1 trillion per year in investments. And the bill makes clear that those investments would create good jobs economy-wide. The president said last night that climate action means jobs, jobs, jobs. He's absolutely right. 15 million jobs, to be precise. We'd create over 5 million jobs to replace every lead pipe in the country, build clean and affordable public transit, and ensure a reliable electric grid. 4 million jobs to expand access to wind and solar power, electric vehicles, and clean and healthy buildings. Another 4 million jobs to protect our wetlands and forests and invest in family farmers. And 2 million jobs to invest in care for children and the elderly, work that is typically underpaid and performed by women of color. Now that's a ton of jobs, but job quality and job access matter just as much as job quantity. And that is why the Thrive Act requires that all of these investments be tied to strong wage and benefit standards, access to unions, and equitable hiring that favors women and people of color. In sum, this bill is big, but it is no bigger than the crises we face. You know, top-line numbers can seem obtuse, but what's at stake here are the millions of humans whose livelihoods depend on that number. The difference between a large infrastructure package and a small one is whether we upgrade living conditions for over 2 million public housing residents or ask them to stay in unhealthy homes that are vulnerable to climate disasters. It's whether we replace over 60 million gas cars with clean, affordable electric vehicles or leave the gas guzzlers on the road and ask families who live near highways to accept high rates of asthma. It's whether we clean up dozens of polluted Superfund sites across this country or ask the nearby Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities to continue coexisting with toxic air and water. The good news is the size of the need is matched by the size of the opportunity that lies in front of us. There are precious few moments when all of the requirements for big structural change line up. Broad public support, strong organizing, elected leaders we can work with, and cross-movement unity like you see on this call today. Now is one of those unicorn moments. So let's seize it to deliver solutions as big as our problems. And with that, I am honored to hand the mic over to Senator Ed Markey, who is helping to lead the charge in the Senate on the Thrive Act. Over to you, Senator.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you for those incredible words that you just spoke. You couldn't be more right. And I just want to, tell everybody how grateful I am to be here with so many of my friends and my colleagues, Representative Debbie Dingell, Yvette Clarke, Jason Crow, Nanette Barragan, AFT's Randy Weingarten, SEIU's Judith Howell, who I was just with as we reintroduced the Green New Deal, Move On's Jenny Nielsen, and the Working Party's families, Nalini Stamp. This group has marched in the streets, put in the sweat equity, and organized like hell to shake the consciousness of our Congress and administration and the public. Our policymakers cannot ignore the realities that are facing millions of Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, and working families all across America. The 4 crises facing America are literally killing us. They are climate change, the public health pandemic, racial injustice, and economic inequality. We can't defeat any of these crises alone. We must develop a roadmap for recovery that addresses them all. With more than 15 million people out of work, we need a plan that will end the unemployment crisis. But we need this plan to also fight systemic racism, protect public health, and drastically cut down on climate pollution. We can't go back to business as usual. We have a chance to truly, in this moment, build back better and greener than ever before. We have a chance to lay out our economic vision for the next generation while repairing historic injustices done to frontline communities and communities of color. We are at a time of struggle, but just as FDR found in the Great Depression, we are also in a time of great opportunity. For the first time in a generation, we have the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. And I would urge everyone on this call and every lawmaker who was listening last night, we cannot let this moment vanish like sand in an hourglass. If we give the other side time to run out the clock on climate action, they will. If we give the other side time to run out the clock on good paying union jobs, they will. If we give the other side time to run out the clock on justice, they will. Ladies and gentlemen, now is not just the time to take this legislation to the floor. Now is the time to roll up our sleeves, put on our marching boots, and take it to the streets. This spring and summer, I will be calling for jobs and justice and climate to ensure our country can thrive again after this pandemic. If we are not careful, this recovery will be only a fleeting victory against the forces of climate destruction and ultra-wealthy corporations run amok. We've got to fight like hell because the eyes of history are upon us. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Judith Howell from 32BJ SEIU, who is an incredible warrior on the battlefield of the fight for justice. Judith.
Come on, give it to me. Hi. Thank you, Senator Markey. My name is Judith Howell. I don't know why I can't get my video up, but I work as a security officer here in D.C., and I'm a proud member of Local 32BJ, the Service Employees International Union. The fight for climate justice is critically important to my union. 32BJ is one of more than 200 local unions that are a part of the Service Employees International Union. And SEIU has more than 2 million members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. With others in unionism, we strive for unions for all workers. Now is the time we need big, bold legislation like the Thrive Act. When millions of people are out of work, we need a massive investment in good union jobs that meets the scale of the crisis. When people all around the world are suffering from extreme weather, rising sea levels, and toxic pollution, we need urgent action to move at the speed that science requires to permanently transition to renewable energy. And when justice requires an end to racism, xenophobia, and all other forms of discrimination, we need to move forward with equity at the center of all that we do. The Thrive Act calls for an investment in infrastructure, like making sure everyone has clean water, that there are energy efficient buildings, that we invest in solar and offshore wind. It also calls for an investment in the care community. That is funding for the services we need to take care of our children, take care of our elders, and the social services that many people need. That's why my 32BJ SEIU supports the Thrive Act. It is big, it is bold, and it is about justice and equity. Climate advocacy is not new for us. 32BJ is a part of the People's Climate Movement. 32BJ is also a longtime member of the Blue-Green Alliance, and my union has an award-winning Green Supers training program. My union understands that without the Thrive Act, the political will won't exist to force corporations to change their behavior. The greedy never care about the needy, the communities who have done the least to cause climate change. African Americans and other people of color, the working poor, displaced immigrants are disproportionately hurt the most. It is in fact the poor and the sick, many sickened by the pollutants that contribute to climate change, who are the least equipped to deal with bad air, increased heat waves, and rising sea levels. Come on, we must act now. We must take this to the people so they understand what is causing the problems in their community. We can't wait.
Thank you so much for that, Judith. You're so right. We can't wait. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over now to Jennifer Lauren Nielsen, a Move On volunteer from Montana.
Hello, my name is Jenna Loren. I'm coming to you from Missoula, Montana. I'm a member of Move On, one of the largest progressive organizations in the U.S. I'm a proud fifth-generation Montanan, but feel it's important to acknowledge I grew up on the Aboriginal lands of the Salish and Kalispel people. This is part of why I support the Thrive Act. Montana is home to 12 indigenous tribes, and the burdens that rural and indigenous communities face is different than elsewhere. Looking back through my own family's history, I can see how economic and industrial changes have affected us personally. I saw how corporate takeovers in rural communities can actually drive small business owners like my grandfather completely out of the creamery business, where he provided local communities milk, ice cream, and jobs. Generations of Montana families have raised their children here in a manner that honors their roots and instills the value only being in nature can provide. We are a large state, but a small population. We are denied access to technologies like high-speed internet because corporations don't invest in us. They don't see us as profitable. As a result, many Montana families are often separated for work. Generations of children like myself have been forced to leave due to lack of job opportunities, livable wages, which has only been exacerbated by a 2-decade-long housing crisis. Montana, once famous for lumber and coal, has seen industries like lumber drop down to a third than it was just a few years ago. Coal is a technology whose costs have now outweighed its benefits. We want to be green, but we can't eat the mountains. The average income for a Montanan in 2019 was only $32,000 a year. Food costs the same here as it does where you are. We're all shopping in the same chain stores. And just like urban cities, we also have a housing crisis, stagnant wages, and an inability to thrive that has gone on now for generations. It took me 20 years to come home. But just like the salmon, I can tell you in the heart of every Montanan, no matter how far we have to go for work, there is a constant and deep yearning to come home. The Thrive Act is, like they said, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to restore, to protect, and to invest in Montana and other rural states like us, Colorado, the Dakotas, Utah, and Idaho. We are the guardians of what is left of the great American West, but we are quickly losing this bastion of beauty. Currently, Montana has 17 locations the EPA has deemed so toxic that they're considered Superfund sites. The Thrive Act will employ a diverse group of people, 15 million Americans over the next 10 years. These are good STEM jobs as well in climate change and infrastructure projects. They come with strong benefits and at a family-sustaining wage. Most importantly for me, the Thrive Act requires transparency. It requires collaboration with federally recognized tribes, honoring and respecting their sovereignty and self-determination. This is significant. Please support the Thrive Act. Support Indigenous tribes by supporting nature. Support rural, Black, and Brown communities by ensuring we have a chance to truly thrive in America. Thank you. Ms. Stamps, off to you.
Well, it looks like Nalini had to hop off, but I'm so grateful for the message that you brought us, Jennifer. You are so right. We do have this once in a lifetime chance to make sure that Congress moves and acts big and bold to meet the scale of the crises that we are facing today. And so, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to a video so that you can see how you can join in to really, really fuel this people-powered movement. This has been a bottom-up, a grassroots, a frontline and informed movement. And so we need to make sure that we continue to build on that momentum. And so that means
right now, we have the opportunity to pass a truly historic bill in Congress. A bill that would invest $10 trillion over 10 years and create 15 million good union jobs, with at least 50% of investments going to communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. It's called the Thrive Act, a transformational economic recovery package, and we need your help to get it passed. Let's make 100,000 calls to our members of Congress, telling them to support the Thrive Act. It just takes 1 minute. 1 minute to pick up the phone, 1 minute to demand jobs and justice from the people who represent you, 1 minute for future generations, 1 minute for the world. Right now, we have the opportunity.
It really only does take 1 minute to really make a big impact and to make sure that your voice is heard and to join the other, millions of people all across the nation who are advocating on behalf of the Thrive. And so, our country is currently facing an intersection of many crises. Over the last year, we've seen millions of people who have lost their jobs and healthcare in the middle of a deadly pandemic. Catastrophic climate events like the recent winter storm that impacted my community in Oklahoma and all throughout the South are becoming more and more frequent. However, right now we have a once in a generation chance to rebuild and renew our economy and to fight for a recovery package that addresses these crises on all fronts. And we can do so by demanding that Congress support the Thrive Act. So again, the Thrive Act is a truly bold recovery package that invests $10 trillion over the next 10 years. Thrive puts 15 million people back to work in good green jobs. It cuts climate pollution in half by 2030, and it advances racial, environmental, indigenous, and economic justice. Tens of thousands of people have already been taking action on the Thrive Act. We've already seen, a cake delivery, a virtual happy hour, and a live DJ in New York, an interactive webinar in Alaska, a Thrive for Indian Country campaign being kicked off, a town hall event in Pennsylvania, a mural unveiling in New Mexico, and numerous rallies at congressional offices, all to demonstrate public support for the Thrive Act. And so this is where you come in. You can take action too and make sure that your voice is heard, all from the comfort of your home. And again, it only takes 1 minute. We need you to hold Congress's feet to the fire and demand a bold economic recovery plan. So call your members of Congress today and ask them to support the Thrive. Thank you so much for showing up. And, I hope that you follow the Green New Deal Network. You can check out our calls to action on greennewdealnetwork.org. You can also visit to learn more about the Thrive at thriveagenda.com. And, I hope that you join us. It's a people-powered movement fueled by us and for us. It's time to thrive. Niawe.